Our dearest and proud alumni, greeting from Manipal College of Health Profession. I confirm to you that in 2018, Manipal Academy of Higher Education is accorded with Institute of Eminence status by Ministry of Human Resource and Development, Government of India. It's a very prestigious moment for each and every one of us. Manipal College of Health Profession, formerly known as School of Allied Health Science or the College of Allied Health Science, and we changed the name as Manipal College of Health Profession from 1st April 2019, and this is the first full-fledged institutions in the country for providing quality education, research and clinical training. We place in the record the role of alumni being the brand ambassador of this institution, having made it possible. I myself, being an alumnus of the Department of Physiotherapy, feel extremely happy and proud that the Department of Physiotherapy is consistently maintaining the top ranking department in the country for providing quality education, research and clinical training over the last 25 years. We wish to strengthen the pillar of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, the alumni network, and I invite each and every one of you to stay connected with us. Immediately register yourself at the Manipal Alumni portal today and be the proud alumni of the institution and the university. On behalf of the institution, once again I
A very good morning, one and all. Greetings from Department Alumni Relations, Department of Physiotherapy, Manipal College of Health Professions. I am Dr. Selvam Ramachandran, Associate Professor Physiotherapy and Coordinator of Department Alumni Relations will be the host for today's webinar. On behalf of Head of Department, Dr. John Solomon, and all my colleagues from Physiotherapy MCHP, a warm welcome to you all for the first episode of Physiotherapy MCHP Global Alumni Webinar Series. Today's webinar will be on transcranial direct current stimulation for promoting motor function and neuroplasticity. The speaker is our esteemed alumna, Dr. Anjali Sivaramakrishnan from MPT 2010 batch. She is presently the Assistant Professor at the Department of Physical Therapy, School of Health Professions, University of Texas Health, San Antonio. Dr. Ramakrishnan completed her bachelor program in physiotherapy from Sancheti Institute College of Physiotherapy, Pune, and master's program in physiotherapy in neurosciences from Manipal College of Health Professions, Mahe, Manipal. She completed her doctoral study from University of Illinois at Chicago. She has rich clinical experience in rehabilitation of individuals with neurological disorders. She received funding from American Heart Association for her dissertation, and she has published in several reputed scientific journals such as Stroke, Scientific Reports, Journal of Neuroengineering and Rehabilitation, among several others. Dr. Ramakrishnan is interested in translating her research on non-invasive brain stimulation using transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation for treatment of individuals with neurological disorders. We are indeed delighted to have you, Dr. Anjali, as a resource faculty. I once again welcome you to this webinar and all the participants. Dr. John Solomon, head of the department, will moderate the session. And over to you, Dr. Anjali. You can share your screen.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Selvam, for the introduction, and thank you, Dr. John, and everyone else for giving this opportunity. And it feels really good to be able to connect to Manipal. Just going to start sharing my screen now. Just give me one moment. It's just loading. All right, is it visible, Dr. Silva?
Yes, please
Okay.
proceed.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you everyone for attending the webinar early in the morning. I really appreciate that. Today I would be talking about using one of the non-invasive brain stimulation modalities which I extensively used during my dissertation research, which is transcranial direct current stimulation, also known as TDCS, just in the context for promoting motor function and neuroplasticity. It's a very broad topic, so for today, I would be restricting it to rehabilitation following stroke. So Dr. Selvam already gave enough information about my background, so I don't think I need to go over this. So just to give a more scientific background about me, I think studying the brain has always been something I'm really passionate about. And one thing that is really challenging is rehabilitating individuals with neurological disorders. And we know that individuals with neurological disorders never recover completely. And as a physical therapist, I found that rehabilitating someone with a stroke or a spinal cord injury was very intriguing. And so I decided to explore it further. And this kind of motivated me to join the Masters in Physical Therapy program in Manipal. And I decided to continue my research interests in rehabilitating individuals with stroke, ALS, during my dissertation. So, as we all are very aware, we know that stroke causes several impairments in different domains, such as the cognitive domain, the motor domain, and neurophysiological impairments. So, one of the models that is really well known in stroke rehabilitation relating to neurophysiological techniques is the interhemispheric competition model. If you see in the figure, the left side represents the non-lesioned or the unaffected hemisphere, and the right side represents the affected or the lesioned hemisphere. In the non-invasive brain stimulation world, they are commonly called as contralesional and ipsilesional. And I would be referring to those terms as we go through the slides. So contralesional refers to the unaffected hemisphere, ipsilesional refers to the affected hemisphere. So typically what is seen is in people with stroke, regardless of acute stroke, subacute, chronic stroke, there is this asymmetry between the two hemispheres. It's almost as if the non-lesion hemisphere is trying to exert control over the lesion hemisphere. And with measurements of transcranial magnetic stimulation, which I will touch upon slightly later, we do see that the non-lesion hemisphere is typically more excitable and the lesion hemisphere is less excitable. So, which is kind of obvious because if someone has an impairment on their, the right extremity, we expect the left side of the brain to not be very responsive. In addition to that, there are these transcallosal pathways between the non-lesion hemisphere and the lesion hemisphere. And the non-lesion hemisphere actually exerts strong influence over the lesion hemisphere and tries to suppress it. So both these, the increased excitability and the increased inhibitory control from the non-lesion to the lesion hemisphere is kind of detrimental towards stroke recovery and stroke rehabilitation. So recovery of stroke, as we know, is based on neuroplasticity. And we know that neuroplasticity is the ability of the nervous system to adapt in structure and function. So adaptive plasticity refers to a gain in function, and maladaptive plasticity refers to a loss of function, which impedes recovery. And a common example is the phantom limb pain, which you see in people with an amputation. So why should we even think about non-invasive brain stimulation? So non-invasive brain stimulation can show a behavioral change. It can improve the interhemispheric imbalance, which I talked about earlier. It is generally safe and feasible. And it can be used as a rehabilitation adjunct, not just by itself, but in combination with other physical therapy modalities. So now I'm trying to bring together a connection between the few slides that we just saw. Um, so we know that stroke causes several functional limitations. So the aim is to integrate principles of neuroplasticity and develop techniques that can improve stroke recovery while trying to, normalize the interhemispheric imbalance. And the end goal is for these techniques to translate from the lab to the clinic or from the lab to home, because ultimately you want the patient to be able to use it. And there's no point of studying an intervention extensively in a lab-based setting when it cannot be translated to a clinic or a home-based setting. So that's kind of the research direction that I'm headed to in the next few years, in trying to develop non-invasive brain stimulation as an adjunct to rehabilitation techniques. So having said that, there are a few learning objectives for this webinar. The first one being the ability to describe the neurophysiological mechanisms and types of TDCS, demonstrate the utility of TMS to quantify TDCS after effects. TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Discuss the utility of TDCS for post-stroke rehabilitation, and discuss a case scenario. So there are different types of non-invasive brain stimulation available. If you see in the figure that the top part of the figure shows high frequency and low frequency repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. The second set of figures show paired associative stimulation. The third set of figures show continuous theta burst stimulation. And the fourth one shows anodal and cathodal transcranial direct current stimulation. So as of now, there are all these different modalities. But today I would be focusing on transcranial direct current stimulation, mainly because it's the simplest paradigm to use amongst all these four, and we'll see how. So transcranial direct current stimulation is constant electric current which is produced by a battery-powered current generator connected to at least two electrodes. There should have been a negative sign here, but it disappeared. So two electrodes, an anode and a cathode, applied to specific head locations or different regions. Now, depending on the desired effects, the polarity of these electrodes can be switched. In this case, what you see over here is you see a battery-powered device, and this provides a constant electric current. So this is connected to the anode. In this case, the anode is actually placed over the motor cortex, and the cathode is placed on the contralateral supraorbital region. So this is a very common montage that is used in transcranial direct current stimulation protocols. If you want to switch the polarity, you could place the cathode here and switch the anode to the region depicted in blue. So this would actually reverse the effects. When the anode is placed on the motor cortex, you expect an excitatory effect, so you expect a net increase in the facilitation. And when the cathode is placed on the motor cortex, you expect to see a decrease in excitation or an inhibition. So depending on the desired effects, you may choose to do either anodal or cathodal stimulation. So now that we briefly know what is TDCS and what it consists of, let's talk about the mechanisms and effects of TDCS. So the most important mechanism to know is that TDCS causes a subthreshold modulation of membrane potential. So it does not cause action potentials. It does not cause anything which is going to translate from one synapse to the other. All that TDCS does is it kind of changes the resting membrane potential. It modulates it to either depolarization or hyperpolarization, but it does not let it go to fire all the way to threshold. And these changes in membrane potential are evident from measuring excitability of the motor cortex using transcranial magnetic stimulation protocols. And I'll come to that in a bit. So the other mechanism, which is also an effect of TDCS, is long-term potentiation like plasticity. Now this happens usually if TDCS is applied over several days or several sessions, then you would actually expect to see changes in the glutamatergic system, which cause long-term potentiation like effects, which are really responsible for motor learning to take place. Along with changes in the glutamatergic system, there is an increased expression of brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, which is one of the growth factors that is really essential for protection of the neurons and survival of the neurons. And this has been gaining a lot of attention in the past 10 years. Scientists are really interested to know how can we best improve the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, not just with TDCS, but also other techniques such as aerobic exercise. And apart from effects directly in the region, so for instance, if you were to stimulate the motor cortex, effects of TDCS have also been seen in other regions of the brain, such as the subcortical areas, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, which goes to explain that TDCS has functional effects. And these changes were seen in functional magnetic resonance imaging modalities, where individuals underwent TDCS and then they saw changes in all these other pathways of the brain which were not even directly stimulated by TDCS. So apart from local effects, TDCS also has regional effects and effects that occur outside of the immediate region. So there are some TDCS protocols that are typically used. And for TDCS, you need electrodes like I showed you earlier, which is you require an anode and a cathode. The placement of the electrodes is usually based on the 1020 EEG system, or typically people also use transcranial magnetic stimulation to actually see where are the responses occurring. So for instance, if I'm interested to look at the wrist muscles of the hand, I do transcranial magnetic stimulation first and see which is the best site in the brain to give me a good motor evoked potential of the wrist muscle. And then we map that site and use that for stimulating with TDCS. So that's one more way to place the electrodes. The current intensity typically ranges from 0.5 milliamperes to 2 milliamperes. And the duration, again, this is really variable. There are studies that have used it for 5 minutes to about 20 to 30 minutes total. So regarding stimulation for the primary motor cortex, also known as M1, there are some types of TDCS montages, or the montage refers to the placement of the electrodes. So the first one, which was also shown in the figure, is when the anode is placed on the motor cortex and the cathode is placed on the supraorbital region. The second one is instead of the anode, now you want an inhibitory effect. So you decide to go cathodal on the motor cortex, anode on the supraorbital region. In people with stroke, this montage is gaining a lot of attention. So in this case, the red or the anode seeks to increase the excitability of the lesion hemisphere, while the black or the cathode seeks to depress the excitability of the non-lesion hemisphere. And this is an extremely, This is a more recent form of TDCS, also called as high definition TDCS. In high definition TDCS, there are several electrodes that are used for stimulating the brain. There was an anode in the center, but so assuming there is an anode. High definition TDCS actually came into picture because all the other montages show a lot of current spread and effects that are not necessarily restricted to the region of the brain. So this might be, desirable in some cases, but in some cases you don't really want the effects to occur in other areas of the brain. So researchers actually started using really small electrodes targeting specific areas of the brain. So this montage is more recent and is being explored nowadays. So I did talk about TMS earlier, and now we see about how can TMS be used for examining the integrity of the descending corticomotor pathways or the corticospinal tracts. So in TMS, a coil is placed. This coil is a magnetic coil which is connected to a high capacitance machine. So this magnetic coil, when placed on the head, when the coil gets discharged, you expect to see responses, also termed as motor evoked potential. My slides are behaving funny. There is a motor evoked potential over here, which I don't know why it's not being seen. Anyway, so you see a motor evoked potential, which is kind of like a sharp, like a compound motor unit potential, so something like that. So the motor evoked potential actually tells you the excitability of these pathways from the brain to the muscle. So in this case, the coil is placed on the areas that control the leg motor region, and the recording is from the tibialis anterior muscle of the leg. So the common measure that's obtained is the motor evoked potential. And these are measures, the motor evoked potential tells you about the corticospinal or the corticomotor pathways. But there are all these other measures that are available, such as intracortical facilitation, transcallosal inhibition, intracortical inhibition, which tells you about excitability or inhibition between all the other intracortical circuits. So specifically, these tell you about the GABAergic circuits or the glutamatergic circuits, the transcallosal pathways. So it gives you a lot of insight about these different pathways, which can help tailor better interventions. So the stimulus response curve is a common way to quantify the corticomotor excitability. And the peak-to-peak amplitude of the motor evoked potential is typically considered as an outcome of interest. And in research, scientists are really interested to see if TDCS or any intervention can increase the peak-to-peak amplitude, because ideally you would want someone to show a signal with greater amplitude after you do the intervention. If the amplitude of the signal goes down, that means the intervention probably did not work, and you may have to change something else. So this peak-to-peak amplitude actually increases with with increase in stimulus intensity. So it's kind of analogous to the action potential, but it's not an action potential. Just to give you an analogy, as the intensity or as the resting membrane potential keeps increasing, it reaches threshold and the neurons will start firing. So for a motor evoked potential, it's a very similar concept. You keep increasing the intensity, and at one point, you will see a jump in the amplitude. This keeps going up, and it actually starts plateauing at higher intensities, which are not shown in the figure. So this curve over here is called as a stimulus response curve, and this is used to quantify the corticomotor excitability. Ideally, with any kind of treatment, you expect this curve to be more steeper. So even at smaller intensities, you should get bigger jumps in amplitude. So you want the curve to become more steeper. If your treatment is not working, or if there is someone who is not responding to your treatment for so many factors, such as stroke-related factors, etc., then you might see a shallow curve. And in some people, you won't even see this because they wouldn't have the motor evoked potential. So these people may have large corticospinal tract lesions, large strokes. You're not able to see the signal at all. So in such cases, you need to look at other measures besides the motor evoked potential to quantify how the corticospinal tract integrity looks like. So this stimulus response curve tells you about the gain of the corticomotor system. And this shaded area in blue is also known as area under the curve. And typically you expect an increase in area under the curve after anode stimulation, and a decrease in area under the curve after cathode stimulation. So finally we can see the motor evoked potential right here. So when you apply TMS to the brain, it kind of sends all these descending volleys and produces a motor evoked potential. And there are different parameters that you can look at. I talked about the peak-to-peak amplitude. You can look at the silent period, the latency, which is when the onset of the motor evoked potential. So these different parameters actually tell you different aspects about the motor system. So these terms are really confusing. I myself was confused when I started my PhD. So just to reiterate, transcranial magnetic current stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation are two different modalities. Transcranial direct current stimulation is a modality which is used, or it is based for inducing treatment-like effects. And in this case, transcranial magnetic stimulation is desired to use as an outcome. So TMS can also be used for treatment, but for today's talk, I'm just talking about diagnostic TMS, which is used as an outcome to measure the effects of TDCS. So before we go on with TDCS related details, it's really important for one to perform a TDCS checklist, a safety checklist, which is used in all research that is related to non-invasive brain stimulation. So it's important to see if the client has had a history of epilepsy or seizures, if there are any metal implants in the brain, if there's a cardiac pacemaker, an implanted neurostimulator, pregnancy, history of syncope, adverse reactions to previous TMS or MRI, and concomitant medications which are used, such as antidepressants and similar medications. So all these medications and these other contraindications that I mentioned can kind of alter the response. So it's really it's being more and more enforced now that before doing any kind of non-invasive brain stimulation, safety checklist needs to be performed. And these are not absolute contraindications. Pregnancy is, epilepsy is, but for other cases such as a cardiac pacemaker, you could still do TMS if the person has been cleared by his or her neurologist and cardiologist. So some of them are absolute, some of them you need to take a call depending on the patient and check with his or her physician. So every intervention, as we know, has adverse effects. And like other interventions, adverse effects for TDCS also need to be considered. Based on the available evidence, overall the balance between beneficial and adverse effects using TDCS seems to suggest that TDCS causes more benefits than harm, which is good. And several studies indicate that the adverse effects of TDCS are really pretty mild. And I've taken TDCS myself, and TDCS just feels like someone's itching your head. That's what most people feel, perceive it to be. Some people might say that it creates a burning sensation, headache in some people, tingling. These are just some of the common side effects. There are other side effects such as nausea, vomiting, insomnia. These are really infrequent and extremely rare. So having a background now with TDCS and TMS, let's look at how TDCS, what's the rationale for using TDCS in stroke rehabilitation. So as I mentioned earlier, the interhemispheric model is a common basis for TDCS. So the contralesional or the unaffected hemisphere shows increased excitability, and this may translate to either normal motor function or even increased motor function in the non-affected hand or leg in an effort to compensate for the weaker side. So the weaker side, on the other hand, shows decreased excitability and decreased motor function. So this model is a basis, is a very common basis for transcranial direct current stimulation. However, over the past, I would say around 6 to 7 years, there has been somewhat of a paradigm shift, and researchers are beginning to understand that this model is, people have been thinking it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but it is not. And there are several cases where this model may not even hold true, which is why a more recent model has come to play. Anyway, so before that, based on this model, the TDCS approaches that are used are anodal TDCS, where the anode is placed on the lesion hemisphere, cathode on the opposite side for stimulating the lesion hemisphere. A bilateral montage, where the anode is over the lesion hemisphere, cathode is over the non-lesion hemisphere. And a cathodal montage, where the cathode is actually suppressing the non-lesion hemisphere or the contralesional hemisphere, and the anode is placed on the supraorbital region corresponding to that of the lesion hemisphere. So this has been used since a long time and is still continuing to be used. But more recently, this model was introduced. This model is called as the bimodal balance recovery model, and I'll talk about it more in a bit. So as we know, in our clinical experience, many times when you see individuals with stroke, you see if they have a mild lesion, they're more likely to present with mild impairment. And someone with a bigger lesion is likely to present with greater motor impairment or more severity. So those who have mild or smaller lesions do have these crossed corticospinal pathways, which are still somewhat intact. So they are damaged, but they're still somewhat intact. So the approach is to kind of use these tracts for your non-invasive brain stimulation therapy techniques. A more different approach that's been come to play is when someone presents with greater damage. What's been seen is that the contralesional dorsal premotor cortex kind of just jumps in and it tries to help the hemisphere which is weaker and which is not able to control the affected extremity. So if you see in the picture, this green line over here represents this PMD or the dorsal lateral premotor cortex trying to be active and stimulating using all the excitatory connections to stimulate the paretic upper extremity. So in some people, what's been seen is that if they have greater damage, such damage that the corticospinal tract is completely, it's almost, the connections are almost severed, or there is no connect between the brain and the anterior horn cells in the spinal cord, maybe using these other neural substrates in the unaffected hemisphere would be a good idea, rather than just trying to stimulate the ipsilesional or the affected hemisphere. So based on this approach, TDCS shows if someone were to present with less damage, then you would try to facilitate the ipsilesional hemisphere or the anodal hemisphere. And if someone were to show more damage, you would try to facilitate the contralesional hemisphere. So again, use anodal, but this time facilitate the contralesional hemisphere, which is kind of a complete opposite from the interhemispheric competition model, where you were actually inhibiting the contralesional hemisphere. So this model is again just about 7 years old, and some research has started to kick in this area, but we still don't know completely if this is a good idea or if everyone would benefit with this approach. So now let's look at the evidence with respect to stroke rehabilitation. So as I mentioned earlier, TDCS shows polarity-specific effects, whereas such as anodal stimulation increases corticomotor excitability and cathodal stimulation decreases corticomotor excitability. And overall, what has been seen in all these motor learning studies is that TDCS reduces the amount of GABA levels, which is actually a precursor for inducing neuroplasticity. And this is a major basis why anodal TDCS has been used in combination with task training, because TDCS by itself, as I mentioned earlier, does not really causes the synapses to fire and generate an action potential. But when TDCS is combined with task training, it's kind of an overflow with both the approaches. So both approaches work together, and you expect to see synaptic changes, long-term potentiation-like changes, increase in BDNF, and all the other things that I talked about earlier. So that is ideal, which is why many studies typically use TDCS in combination with some kind of training activity. So TDCS, a common example is how TDCS can be combined with motor training. So in this picture, you see a person receiving TDCS and doing constraint induced movement therapy right after TDCS or with TDCS. Now, when a person does that, TDCS and motor training can actually prime the motor cortex. So this is also called as priming for inducing synaptic plasticity. So this approach is being used, increasingly being used nowadays, where researchers are actually trying to see if TDCS can be applied for about 15 minutes and then motor training can be performed either during TDCS, after TDCS, or before TDCS, trying to see which combination would elicit the best gains in clinical outcomes as well as neurophysiological outcomes. So let's look at the evidence now. In terms of TDCS for upper limb function, studies have shown that TDCS shows improvements in clinical tests such as the Fugl-Meyer score, the Jepsen-Taylor hand function tests, reaction time, pinch force, task performance, grip force. And There are studies that have also showed no change in reaction time, reaching distance, pinch strength, grip force, clinical outcomes. So you see, there are studies that show positive effects, and there are studies that show no effects. With respect to the lower limb, again, there are studies that show change or increase in strength, motor function, skill accuracy, balance, force steadiness, 6-minute walk test, cortical excitability. And there are studies that really do not show changes in corticomotor excitability, coordination, peak torque, strength, or lower limb kinematics. So what I showed earlier is just few studies that I looked at. There are several studies out there. So these are some of the few single session studies that I looked at. However, TDCS can be used as a combination tool with virtual reality, constrained induced movement theory, therapy, strength training, treadmill training, peripheral nerve stimulation, and TDCS as a combination tool has shown positive effects in stroke rehabilitation. So taking a detour, just showing you about what I did during my dissertation. I used aerobic exercise and TDCS. It was a single session study, and I was really interested in looking at the effects of aerobic exercise and TDCS for improving neurophysiological outcomes, that is TMS measures and reaction time measures. So what I found was that, we'll go to that in a bit, but before that, at baseline, I just did Fugl-Meyer motor extremity scale, gauge speeds, and then we measured transcranial magnetic stimulation related corticomotor excitability measurements and reaction time. And subjects were randomized into 3 sessions. This was a single session study, and there was a crossover between the 3 conditions. So they did either aerobic exercise with TDCS, and it was anodal TDCS. They did aerobic exercise with sham TDCS, which is another type of TDCS where the machine is just turned on for about 30 seconds to 1 minute, and participants start feeling the current, and without their knowledge, you turn the machine off. So this is analogous to a placebo therapy in a drug study. And why this is being used as a control is because when you do actual anodal or cathodal TDCS, the sensations start fading out after a bit. So with sham, you're trying to emulate that. So participants do not really know if they're in the active condition or the sham condition. And the third session was participants were just sitting at rest and they were receiving TDCS. So following the sessions, we performed the same outcomes that we performed at baseline. In addition, we also looked at intracortical inhibition and transkillosal inhibition measures. So what we found was really interesting. And to tell you more, on the graph, what you see on the y-axis depicts a percent change in area under the curve, which was a corticomotor excitability stimulus response curve that I showed earlier. And the x-axis shows the contralesional hemisphere on the left and the ipsilesional hemisphere on the right. Blue depicts TDCS, green depicts aerobic exercise, and orange depicts aerobic exercise and TDCS. So higher values are suggestive of more excitability, and that's what is a desired effect, and lower values are suggestive of less excitability. So what we found was there were similar trends for both the contralesional and the ipsilesional hemisphere, which was really interesting because we did not even stimulate the contralesional hemisphere. For the ipsilesional hemisphere, we found that change after aerobic exercise in TDCS was higher as compared to change after aerobic exercise, and change after TDCS was higher compared to change after aerobic exercise. So this was something that we did not expect because there are several studies that show aerobic exercise actually increases corticomotor excitability and neuroplasticity. But in our participants, aerobic exercise decreased corticomotor excitability. So of course, this was just one session. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to actually see if you see similar changes with multiple sessions. So that was how I used TDCS and combined with aerobic exercise to look at corticomotor excitability changes. So the big picture, so what? We know all this information about TDCS. What does it tell us? So recent meta-analysis have shown that TDCS and long-term motor training is beneficial and also shows retention effects. So This is a study which included several randomized control trials, and they adapted levels of evidence with relation to non-invasive brain stimulation related literature. What about montage? We looked at all the different montages, and what this meta-analysis suggests is that following chronic stroke, all three montages seem to be effective, but bihemispheric montage showed better effects. Following acute or subacute stroke, the contralesional montage seemed better in comparison to the other two, which kind of makes sense, especially in the acute or subacute stage, because in the acute stage, the lesion hemisphere is actually really suppressed, and the contralesional or the non-lesion hemisphere is more hyperactive, and it exerts all these increased excitability effects on the lesion hemisphere. So perhaps using contralesional in these stages might be beneficial for facilitating stroke recovery. What about other aspects? So there is duration post-stroke. Chronic strokes seems to show better long-term effects. Regarding type of stroke, very few studies comparing different types of strokes. Bulk of literature is in chronic stroke, but better effects were seen in subcortical strokes. And regarding the timing of stimulation before or during intervention, so when TDCS is applied just before, say, aerobic exercise or motor task performance, or during the task performance, that seems to be ideal rather than applying after intervention. So having said all this, if you remember the slides on motor function for upper limb and lower limb, TDCS just shows responses where some studies actually showed increase in corticomotor excitability, motor function, and some studies showed no change. And some of the reasons that might be underlying these results would be individual variability. So all of us are different individuals, and biologically we have variability even in the type of our skull shape, the way the sulci and the gyri are oriented. So that may be one reason why TDCS showed different responses. There is also variability relating to task performance. So some individuals may not be able to perform a certain task. For instance, if you were to ask a stroke survivor who has significant hand involvement to do a tracking task, that person may not be able to do it with his or her index finger. Even though sometimes in trials you might include them based on an initial criteria, but when you start doing repetitive sessions, you might see that this person is getting fatigued, he or she is not able to do it. So in such cases, that might also be a reason for responses that are not ideal. Another factor is genetics. Individuals who have a certain type of BDNF polymorphism, that's just the orientation of valine and methionine in BDNF. So individuals who have a certain type of polymorphism may show decreased responses to TDCS. And as far as aging is considered, individuals who are older adults may again show different responses to TDCS as someone who is a younger adult. Since we're talking about stroke, there are all these stroke-related factors such as duration post-stroke, type of stroke, lesion size and volume. All these factors also affect responses to TDCS and the measurement outcome that is chosen. So many times what happens is you choose an outcome that may not be representative of the task that you've chosen. So for instance, you're actually making the participant do a finger task, and you're looking at the Fugl-Myers scale for the entire upper extremity. So now, ideally, you wouldn't even expect a change to occur in the Fugl-Myers scale because it's looking at all the different components from shoulder to the finger muscles. So in such cases, using some more specific outcomes, which is restricted to the hand or the finger muscles, would be appropriate. So other than that, things to be considered include stroke severity. As I spoke about earlier, the bimodal balance recovery model tells us if someone has less damage, facilitate the ipsilesion hemisphere, use anodal stimulation. Whereas if someone has more damage, try to use these ipsilateral tracts, which are connecting the non-affected hemisphere to the affected extremity. So use that reserve. So perhaps try to stimulate that and see if that helps in bringing a response. Another factor is brain modeling. A lot of research has come up with with regard to computational neuroscience, where researchers are actually using different modeling to look at the current flow within the brain when TDCS is applied. So sometimes the TDCS current flow may not be in the desired direction, which is why brain modeling could tell us more about what's actually happening inside the brain. Sometimes when you use TDCS in combination with another intervention, you could either get an increase in effects or decrease in effects or even cancellation of effects. So that's something to keep in mind while you're designing TDCS as a combination, TDCS in a combination paradigm. Also, recent studies suggest that going with higher intensities of current, approximately 2 milliamps, might be better, and TDCS administered over longer durations, so several sessions would be better than a single session. And finally, choosing goal-dependent motor tasks are really important. In the stroke literature, at least, there is a lot of overlap between motor performance and motor learning. So these terms are used interchangeably, but they're actually two separate entities. Motor performance is when you're evaluating somebody's performance immediately, typically. And motor learning is when you're asking the person to do the same task over and over again, and then you see a new skill acquisition in that person. So the mechanisms for motor performance are different, mechanisms for motor learning are different. So choosing tasks depending on your goal, depending on your patient's goal is really important while designing NIBS protocols. All right, so with that, we are now at the case scenario. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read out the case scenario, and then you all can take about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on how much time we have. And you can come up with your own ideas. It doesn't need to be what I talked about earlier. You could do a brief literature search and come up with your best recommendations for Mr. William. So Mr. William is a chronic stroke survivor, and he shows fine motor involvement of hand muscles. He doesn't want to show his hand muscles in the picture. So his brain scans show a small lesion in the right internal capsule, and a TMS evaluation shows small motor evoked potentials from his left hand muscle. So he can do some activities of daily living, but he needs assistance. And his primary goal is to improve the strength in his left arm and hand. So keeping this knowledge background, you would need to formulate a protocol incorporating TDCS for Mr. Blake or William. Sorry about that. And you need to justify the TDCS mode. So anodal, cathodal, bihemispheric, whatever you're using, why do you think that might be effective? And what dose would you use? And along with TDCS, what activities would you want to include with the TDCS intervention? So keep this in mind. I'll keep this slide up over here, and you can take about 5 minutes, or Dr. Selvam or Dr. John. Is 5 minutes good or 10 minutes? I'm not sure how much time.
5 minutes is good.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so 5 minutes, and come up with your own ideas about how you could integrate TDCS as an intervention tool.
I leave this task to mainly the postgraduate students to create.
Sure.
They can start working on it and get back by 8:56.
Okay.
Meanwhile, during this gap time, I probably would just keep talking a little bit about Anjali. Anjali Ramakrishnan, when she was here at Manipal, she was a very bright and enthusiastic and an outstanding student of her batch. We were extremely proud of her. And especially related to her, I just want to point out about her postgraduate thesis. And that was the first blinded randomized, rater blinded randomized trial we did here. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, if you remember, Anjali, we're trying to fool Archana or
Yeah,
not to
yeah.
ensure that she won't know whether it is TENS or FES it is given. So in her thesis, she was looking at effect of spasticity, effect of FES, comparing the effect of TENS and FES on spasticity in spinal cord injury patients.
Mhm.
And so we had to blind the rater to not know what treatment is given. And especially when the patients are in the ward, there was a chance that the other rater was a classmate Archana who might see which treatment is being given. So every time when Anjali goes near the patient, she will be carrying the FES machine as well as TENS both in hand. So that when
Yeah.
she sees both the equipment. And then once
And
she
we
goes
used to
there,
have the
they will cover.
screens.
We will put the screens all around so that she by chance also won't see which treatment is given. So we really did blind Archana very well. And that way we know there was no bias in the outcomes that we saw. And congrats to Anjali and on successfully publishing that work in Final Comments paper in the journal. So,
Thank you so much, sir.
and
Yeah.
even PhD guide had a very high regards for her work when she was at the University of Illinois Chicago from Dr. Sankita Madhavan. Some of our PGs will know Dr. Sankita and PhD scholars will know when she visited a year and a half ago here when she had here for and had interacted with our scholars. And we are really very proud of you that you are now a faculty at one of the very reputed university, UT Health Sciences San Antonio.
Thank you,
And
sir.
so we have been having association with that department through Sandeep Subramaniam for the past few years. We have had a couple students coming down to Manipal from there. So hopefully we hope to strengthen the ties along with you in the future as well.
Absolutely.
See how it is.
Oops.
We'll have one more minute possibly. Then we can start the vote.
Yeah, even I had a great time at Manipal, and I still, even when I'm, preparing my slides for my neuroscience class, I'm reminded of all the different patients that I got to work with over there, and all the clinical experience that I gained, not just clinical, both research and clinical. So that has really refined me into what I am today. So extremely grateful to that, and all the neuro faculty, Dr. John, Dr. Mani, and Dr. Senthil, all three of them have been instrumental in shaping me. So I'm really happy to continue this association.
I think shall we start? We can start the discussion now.
Okay. So before I start, giving my thoughts, does anyone want to, do you want to share your thoughts? So kindly feel free to unmute yourself. And there is no right or wrong answer. It's just based on what you think. This is a hypothetical case scenario. So whatever you think would be appropriate. I just want to hear your thoughts. So feel free to go ahead and chime in. Yeah, go ahead. Sakshi? Yeah, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and start talking.
Hello?
Yeah, we can
Hello.
hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I just some problem with the mic, I think. Yeah. Hi. It was a wonderful webinar from your side. We got to learn a lot. So to answer your question, I think since it's a chronic stroke, Bihemispherical sort of application will be beneficial with say around 2 milliamp of intensity and maybe 25 minutes duration. And since the person is experiencing distal fine motor involvement, we can expect maybe some amount of motor control present in the distal extremity, and hence
Mhm.
maybe go for CIMT protocol for this patient. So if CDCS can be used as an adjunct, it could be used prior to treatment. So maybe a 25-minute application of CDCS prior, followed by a
Mhm.
CIMT protocol for him could be beneficial. That's what I think.
Yep, that's a great answer. Using bihemispheric montage in chronic stroke, like I said, is gaining a lot of attention. So that's a great answer. Thank you for your answer. Anyone else wants to talk, has different thoughts than what Sakshi just told us about? Feel free to, talk about it. If not, it looks like the webinar has not stimulated your brains enough. Okay. Vasant? Or I'm sorry if I'm reading the name wrong. Or Vriddhi.
That's
Go ahead.
Vriddhi. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning, ma'am.
Hi, good morning.
Ma'am, I agree with Sakshi more or less.
Mhm.
The only thing is maybe we could use, other than CIMT, we could even use task-oriented training, context-specific for the patient
Mhm.
also.
Mhm. Okay, sure. Those are great answers, and I'll just show my perspectives about what I think would be a good montage. Again, there's no right answer, like I said earlier. So, since it's a small lesion, it's mild damage. So, it looks like there is potential for neuroplasticity in the ipsilesional M1. So, ideally, reevaluate with transcranial magnetic stimulation to check excitability of both hemispheres. So, look at the non-affected hemisphere, look at the affected hemisphere, see how they're doing. If the non-affected hemisphere is really strong and is inhibiting the affected hemisphere, going with bihemispheric would be ideal. But if the non-affected hemisphere is not that strong and it looks like the affected hemisphere also, has these motor evoked potentials, which we already know. And in addition, you're looking at all these transcallosal pathways, and you can say that both hemispheres are not really competing with each other. So in such a case, you could also go for anodal TDCS for the ipsilateral motor region. So again, I put 20 minutes of TDCS and motor training specific for the hand muscles. So I didn't say which hand muscle, so it was totally up to you. It could be the dorsal interossei, it could be the thumb muscle, doesn't matter. So finger tracking exercises, strengthening exercise. And what is really important is to do it over a period of time rather than just one session. So anytime between 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the response, it's good to do interim assessments. So you do it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, do a TMS, and then go ahead and see if the person is responding. If not, you may have to change your paradigm or look at other factors. So we do have a question here. Does TDCS have any carryover effects? If yes, can we train this patient during and after stimulation as well? That's a good question. Yes, TDCS has carryover effects. Again, those effects are more likely to occur if it's over a longer duration of time. So you can definitely do it after or after TDCS. You can even do it. So what research has shown is that TDCS could have stimulation effects from about 5 to 6 minutes to about 2 hours. That's a single session of TDCS, and I'm not. These are just numbers from the top of my head, so I'm not totally. I don't think I'm totally accurate. But if you were to do it over time, you would expect to see more longer lasting effects because of all the neurophysiological mechanisms that I spoke about earlier. So that's pretty much it. Um, so the take home message is that TDCS is a promising adjunct, but needs larger studies with bigger effect sizes. So first, TDCS is safe, does not cause many adverse effects as we saw, tolerable. Itching and tingling is okay. We can bear it. It's not painful. So it's an ideal candidate for combination paradigms. So the main mechanism is a subthreshold modulation of membrane potential. It seems to be beneficial. All these recent meta-analysis suggest that it could be used as an adjunct for motor rehabilitation in stroke. But as I talked about earlier, there are a lot of challenges with respect to inter-individual and intra-individual variability, which limit clinical translation. So as of now, researchers are still trying to bridge that gap where you don't want the variability to occur and you want to have a more uniform response. So someone who is responding to TDCS with an increase in motor function may show an exact opposite effect after 2 days. So you want to understand why that occurs and how can we try to prevent that preemptively. So that's something that research is trying to address now. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and just thought I'll put up some pictures of my times at Manipal. I was from a conference and we had a lot of fun. I don't remember much from the conference, but I do remember that we had a lot of fun. And those are all my fellow neuro postgraduates. So thank you everyone. I really appreciate your time and being able to come early in the morning. And I hope this webinar has been useful in one way or the other. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.
Thank you, Anjali. That was a wonderful session. Maybe we can take a few questions. This time, I think already the one that has come in the chat box. We will take two or three more questions, two questions more, and then we will wind up.
Sure. So I'm just saying about better effects were seen in subcortical stroke. What could be the possible mechanism? That's a good question. So a possible mechanism in patients with subcortical stroke, I'm thinking that these individuals with subcortical stroke did not really have a lot of impairments compared to chronic individuals with chronic stroke. That's one. And the other is that the meta-analysis had more studies which included chronic stroke and less studies with subcortical stroke. So when the effects were pooled for each population, the subcortical stroke was really small. So maybe about few studies compared to those with chronic stroke, which kind of showed the overall effect to drive towards subcortical stroke. There's another question. Recently, TDCS has been used for post-stroke fatigue, and what are my thoughts on it? So yes, TDCS has been used for several things other than motor function, which I have not talked about. And it's also been used to treat central fatigue as well as peripheral fatigue, but more so it's central fatigue. I personally have not used TDCS to treat fatigue as such, and as of now, I think that this is just another outcome that is being explored in TDCS because TDCS has actually shown some effects to improve fatigue in multiple sclerosis. So fatigue is everyone with multiple sclerosis experiences fatigue, and TDCS has shown some improvements. So researchers are trying to use that in stroke. But as of now, the exact mechanisms are not clear. So we still need more research to know how does TDCS improve post-stroke fatigue.
Any other questions? Anyone would like to ask any other questions? You can please raise your hand. Yes, Apurva. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, sir. Hi, ma'am. That was a great presentation. Thank you for that. And I had one question regarding TMS or the 1020 system, which is a better method for locating the region where you need to stimulate?
That's a good question. In my experience, using the TMS is better. I haven't used I've used the 1020 system, but the 1020 system is somewhat arbitrary. So ideal answer to that question is using TMS and EEG. I don't know if you're aware about it. So TMS can be used with EEG, and you will be able to look at both spatial and temporal activation patterns from the motor cortex. So that is the ideal way to do it. But in my experience, doing it with TMS actually gives you a more localized picture than using the 1020 EEG system, because the 1020 EEG system is just a guideline. It just tells you upper limb motor cortex is more lateral, C3, C4 area, lower limb cortex is more medial. But when you do TMS, you actually see changes in the location of the motor cortex, which might be due to the stroke, or you even see it in healthy individuals. Different people have different, somewhat different locations of the motor cortex. These are not huge differences, they are just differences in like 1 millimeter, but still using TMS would be better. And more than the TMS that I talked about, using navigated TMS, which is very accurate would be ideal to do.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mhm.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you everyone for participating. It was, as I told, it was a very wonderful session. I think there are some more questions coming. Yeah, there are some.
No, I'm happy to take questions. It means people
Yeah,
are attentive.
yes, Pratisha. Yeah, so this has put a comment and there is one question. Could you just check that?
Uh, Thank you, Senthil sir, for your comment. Um, has this been used in pediatric population? Yes, TDCS has been used in pediatric population because it's safer, like I mentioned earlier. Um, I am not very up to date with pediatric literature, so really don't know insights about that right now. But TDCS has been used in pediatric population with a greater emphasis on safety and adverse effects.
Yep, I think we will now wind up, Anjali. Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks a lot. And we look
sure.
forward to initiating new tie-ups, new research collaborations in the coming months.
Mhm.
With that. And thanks to all the participants as well. Over to Selvam for the final comment.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali, for that wonderful session. So we thank you for accepting our invitation to be the resource faculty for this webinar. And this is the first webinar for this year. And we look forward to have many more webinars with you in the months to come. And as HOD has mentioned, we look forward for stronger ties with you as well as with your institute. Yeah, nice
Absolutely.
to have you. And thanks to all participants who have joined this webinar. Thank you all. So we'll catch up with one other edition of this Physiotherapy MCHP Global Alumni Webinar Series. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.